Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this February meeting of the Pitt County Planning Board to order. Ms. Alton, would you call the roll, please?
Fred Austin.
Present.
Don Brown.
Present.
Naomi Buck.
Here.
David Davenport.
Here.
Thompson Forbes.
Present.
Lyman Hardy.
Here.
R.J. Hemby. John Landron.
Here.
Steve Little.
Here.
Charles McGlonghorn.
Here.
And Mr. Chair, we received notice that Madison Downey will not be here tonight.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Would you please join me in a moment of prayer led by Mr. John Ladrine, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, led by Mr. David Davenport.
Our Father, who art in heaven. Lord, first of all, we come before you just saying thank you, Father. We thank you for all that you've done and all that you will do, Lord. We ask that you be with us this day. Bless our hearts, our minds. Keep our ears open as well as our hearts, Father, so that we do the right things for our communities, Father. And when we leave, we ask that you give us traveling mercies on the way back home until we meet again. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we all say, Amen.
Amen. Place the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
At this time, we will have the approval of the minutes of last meeting. Do I hear a motion to such?
So moved. Second, Don Brown.
I have a motion by Mr. Hardy and a second by Mr. Brown. Any comment? If not, all those in agreement, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. The minutes are approved. At this time, I'd like to call and just see if we have any public addresses to the board. I will open the meeting up for that. But seeing that we have no speakers signed up, we will close the public addresses to the board. Moving on, Mr. Ben Rogers, would you please come forward and present our first rezoning request, please?
Good evening, everyone. We do have one rezoning request this evening. It has been submitted by Glendon Forest Equity LLC. The request is to rezone 1.79 acres of property owned by the Elizabeth Brown Cuban heirs. It's parcel number 49759. It is located at the eastern intersection of NC 33 West and Belvoir School Road. And the request is to rezone from rural agricultural to general commercial conditional district to allow department, variety, or general merchandise. The site location, as you see on the map in front of you, is located kind of northwest of Greenville on 33, west of its intersection with US 264. Some site pictures of the property. This is looking at the site from NC 33. This is kind of looking back towards the site from Belvoir School Road. This is looking back west towards Greenville on 33. Or excuse me, back east, and then looking west here, back west on 33. This is from that intersection north on Belvoir School Road. Then back south, looking at that intersection with 33. And this is the remainder of the property. Again, it's a larger site. They are looking just to rezone 1.79 acres. So just want to include this to kind of show the existing agricultural and the remainder of the property. This is a sand mine that is in operation just south of the proposed site. It's Belvoir School or Elementary School. It's a manufactured home park kind of adjacent to the school, and then some residential uses on Belvoir School Road. The comprehensive land use plan and the future land use map does designate this site as suburban residential. And suburban residential is intended to include residential land uses, including single-family and manufactured home subdivisions and manufactured home parks at densities of 1 to 4 dwelling units per acre, limited multifamily, commercial, office, light industrial, and public institutional uses meeting locational criteria. Land designated as suburban residential is distinguished by the greater potential for development and the inclusion of a broader range of land uses. That locational criteria for non-residential uses within this category would include frontage and access to a major state highway or secondary road, and location at a major intersection, proximity to similar uses, and spatial separation from non-compatible uses, such as existing residential development. The existing land uses in the area, you see the site is currently agricultural undeveloped, as with the large portion of the area. You see just south is that sand mine we looked at briefly. Blue is the elementary school, and then the orange is the existing residential, with both some single tracts with individual homes, as well as a couple manufactured home parks in the area. The current zoning of the area, again, the site is currently rural residential. The three darker areas, the darker green, that's rural agricultural. Those are all sand mines that have been rezoned in the past few years, but otherwise everything else out there is rural residential currently. The general commercial zoning district is primarily intended to accommodate a range of retail, service, office, limited wholesale, and moderate density multifamily residential uses in areas that have access to major thoroughfares and the necessary utilities to support such development. A conditional zoning district allows for the approval of a proposal for a specific use with reasonable conditions to assure the compatibility of the proposed use with the use and enjoyment of neighboring properties. And again, the proposed use is for department, variety, or general merchandise. We did receive a sketch plan with the application as is required. So the site area there I've kind of outlined with the red dash line. The yellow there is the proposed retail, the driveway and parking, as well as a stormwater pond. So county staff does find that this request is consistent with the Pitt County Comprehensive Land Use Plan. The area requested for rezoning is designated as suburban residential on the future land use map, and the uses in this area are a mixture of agricultural, industrial, institutional, and residential. Additionally, the site does have is located at an intersection and has frontage and access to a major state highway, NC 33 West. And planning staff also finds that this request is reasonable and in the public interest because of the site's proximity to existing non-residential land uses, and because the proposed use will be a retail use that will provide necessary goods and services to area residents. Again, staff does recommend approval of this rezoning request with the following additional conditions. No zoning compliance permit shall be issued until a site plan prepared in accordance with Appendix B of the zoning ordinance is submitted to Pitt County Planning for review and approval. A landscaping plan is required prior to issuance of a zoning compliance permit and shall include a combination of trees, shrubs, grasses, and other ground cover in accordance with the requirements of Section 10H. The site must comply with the Pitt County Stormwater Ordinance for nutrient control. If 1/2 acre or more is disturbed, nutrient loading and peak flow calculations must be reviewed and approved prior to any improvements. If an acre or more of land is to be disturbed, a soil erosion and sedimentation control plan is required prior to any land disturbing activities. And the Pitt County Soil Survey and USGS map indicates that there is a feature or that may be present on the northwestern corner of the site. A 50-foot riparian buffer is required unless proper documentation is obtained from the North Carolina Division of Water Quality or the Pitt County Planning Department showing that the feature is considered exempt from the Tar-Pamlico buffer regulations. DOT did review the sketch plan that we went over earlier, and these are the comments they provided at this time. NCDOT will require a non-access easement along NC 33. A trip generation and distribution will be required prior to site plan review for this development, but they are not requiring a full-blown traffic impact analysis at this point. Roadway modifications may be required after the NC 33 and State Road 1417 intersection. And NCDOT has a 125-foot by 125-foot right-of-way on the corner of NC 33 and State Road 1417, and that needs to be shown on the site plan. And also, NCDOT would prefer a better probable cross-access connection at this site, as this site is only a portion of the entire parcel. A future roadway expansion is requested rather than a simple driveway. So the public comments will now be entertained by the planning board. The board will then make a recommendation to the Pitt County Board of Commissioners, who are currently scheduled to hear the request and hold a public hearing at their March 20th meeting. I'll turn it over to you, Chairman, for public comments.
Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. At this time, we will
Mr.
entertain
Chairman.
public comments
Mr. Chairman.
from the public.
Point of privilege.
Yes, sir.
Before we entertain public comments, may I comment on the planning board's business and the way this is put together?
Okay.
First of all, I have a question about how this, what is suburban residential? In other words, what is this a suburb of the Belleville Elementary School? Because it's several miles down the road to Belleville, which is not even a municipality. So I don't understand that. I also don't understand how the comprehensive land use plan all of a sudden has wording in it that our zoning ordinance doesn't have. Somebody added the words light commercial and light industrial to the suburban residential category. It seems to me that, first of all, it should have never been suburban residential. And to say that residential areas for planning purposes, suburban residential to include light industrial and commercial, that does violence not only to the English language, but to our zoning ordinance. The North Carolina law, I mean, our zoning ordinance is the law. The map is not law. And my authority for that is NCGS 160-D-501, which says that we are required as, as a county to have comprehensive land use plans and land use maps. But it also says, plans adopted under this chapter shall be advisory in nature without independent regulatory effect, meaning that they don't have the effect of law. And it also says, plans adopted under this chapter do not expand, diminish, or alter the scope of authority for development. And it seems to me like that's what this language that was added, it wasn't in the zoning ordinance, it was added when the comprehensive land use plan was adopted. So there is, in other words, for us to say that this is consistent with the comprehensive land use plan, we have to say that the comprehensive land use plan is not consistent with itself, because this exceeds authority under state law, and it describes uses that are not residential. So I'd like for that to be considered before we even hear public comments, because I also have comments about the project. But I have specific comments about the category that we're considering, because what we're being asked to do, Mr. Chairman, we're being asked to change property from rural residential to commercial general. And the commercial general category allows everything. The suburban residential category doesn't even allow barber shops. It doesn't allow anything. But commercial general allows everything. Everything you can think of, from a funeral home to a convenience store. No offense, Mr. Brown. But what I'm saying is that the range of uses for commercial general, and I know we're on, this is a conditional application, but what is going to happen here is that this entire rural neighborhood, which is really beautiful, is going to be turned into a commercial neighborhood. And that is not in our interest to do that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rhodes, could I
Could
ask
I-
for
could
your
I-
guidance?
I don't know
Can
if
I-
that was, I thought it was a question of staff, but I'm unsure at this point.
It's not a question of staff, it's a question of law.
And I'll be glad to, I don't want to
Well, go
spar
ahead.
with an attorney, but
Go
I will
ahead.
tell you,
Well, tell
you're
me where the
exactly,
language came from, especially
I will-
suburban residential. How does that include commercial and light industrial?
okay, again, two different documents we're talking about. I think you are interplaying the zoning ordinance and the land use plan. Let's take the land use plan first. You're exactly right. State statute requires now, through chapter 160D, that any community, municipality or county, have a land use plan if they are going to enforce zoning. So we've got that in place. We've had that in place all along, and it is imperative. You'll hear more in the second item tonight for a public hearing about our updated land use plan. Our current land use plan, we've been relying on for several years. It has certain categories, in this case suburban residential, and when we're dealing with more rural areas, we don't have the detailed categories that a city of Greenville or some more urbanized area would have. So, all said, when we get to a suburban residential area that is, we consider a suburban area leading outside of Greenville in this case, it's not a suburb of Belvoir, suburb of a major urban area, that's gonna have a broader range of uses. you're gonna have more need for different services than just staunchly residential uses there. So that is why when we look at our land use plan, it says suburban residential. It does give some authority to look at different types of uses than residential. So tonight, we don't think that it should be just simply general commercial with that long laundry list that you talked about. We've got one use and one use only expressly recommended for this particular parcel right now.
But you would agree with me that under the patterns of zoning, one use leads to a like use right beside of it, wouldn't you? Like in the future, somebody's gonna come with the land right next door and say, that's commercial general, and that's what I want is commercial general. Isn't that right?
And again, this is right at an intersection, in our opinion, is better suited for some non-residential use than a residential use with the type of traffic and all that you see there. Further down from there, we have a commercial node. You can actually see it, the red dot on the map, at the interchange of Martin Luther King Boulevard and NC 33. We're recommending commercial there. So that's already on the map.
Well, it doesn't look like an intersection to me. And I'm looking at the map now. It looks like Belleville School Road dead ends into 33, but it doesn't look like an intersection. I know across the street is the sand mine.
That's a T intersection of Belleville School Road with
Okay.
NC 33. Yes. So that is
So-
the location of this site. But that's just to give you an idea, the interplay between your land use plan, we're required by law now, when we get to the commissioner's level, that statement has to be read into the motion, whether it's consistent with the land use plan or not. So you guys make a recommendation, that's carried on by the commissioners.
Well, why is there such a vast difference between suburban residential, I'm talking about a geographic difference, and the edge of Greenville? Because there's a lot of rural residential between this suburban strip that is painted yellow on the map. And, I mean, this doesn't seem like a logical extension of Greenville, like Greenville's natural suburbs are to me.
Well, and again, that'd be great discussion about the new land use plan coming in. I will tell you, these land use plans look 10, 20 years in advance. And that's part of it. What do you envision being along this area within the next 20 years or so? Is it gonna be still, you keep mentioning rural, is it gonna remain rural at a major interchange with NC 33 and Martin Luther King Boulevard, as well as you extend on westward of there toward Belleville Schools? That's really the question.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know when the appropriate time to mention this, but I don't know if everyone has read Ms. Teal's letter.
I was gonna mention that, but you're
It was a
going
beautiful letter, but in that, she said that within 4.5 miles of this proposed store, there were already 6 Dollar Generals and Family Dollars. So, I mean, I view this as a rural area, and I feel like Dollar General, who is this company, they're the major violator of putting stores in the middle of the country. They do it in every county they can and get away with it. And like in Pitt County, for example, they did it at the corner of Frog Level Road and Davenport Farm Road. And in the ditch there's a whole pickup truckload of trash from people who walk to the Dollar General, and that is in a suburb in Winterville. But, it's just not an ideal use. But I'll talk about the use in a minute. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I did have, my comments were very much along the same as Mr. McLaurin's, in that I failed to see how this is consistent with the 2030 land use plan. Or somebody needs to really explain it to me, because I don't see how it's consistent with it. I don't see how changing zoning to commercial is consistent with our plan, when our plan wasn't that. So that, I don't understand the premise in the first place. I don't think it works. That's just, I don't get it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other comments from the board before we enter into public comments?
Mr. Chairman, let me just reiterate, in the table of uses, if you look under suburban residential, you can't even have a barber shop. So to bootstrap this from suburban residential, which it is not, although it does say it is on the map, but the map is not law, as I told you before. The law is the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance doesn't talk about, it doesn't use the word light commercial. And, you look in the zoning ordinance, you won't see that. You'll see that category, but it says suburban residential is suburban residential. It's not commercial and industrial. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And
sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make a
Yes, sir.
clarification too. I think I know where you're getting now. I didn't pick up earlier.
Yes, sir.
But we've got a suburban residential category in our land use plan. We got a suburban residential zoning classification. They don't necessarily equate to one another.
I
So
understand that.
don't think that they have to match perfectly.
I'm just saying that when the word suburban residential is used, there's nothing in the table of uses that would expand, because the statute says you can't expand it by the comprehensive land use plan. You can't expand the law. The law is in the zoning ordinance, not in the plan. And the commercial use and the industrial use is not in the law, because it's not. It's just, it is in the plan, which was adopted by the commissioners, but it's not the law.
I'd say just plain, everyday layman's language. Suburban residential, to me, or anybody I know, something that's not gonna pop into your mind that's gonna be there is a store. That doesn't sound like residential in any type of way. So it just doesn't match to me.
And I'll just bring back up, and again, if you don't agree with, if I can find it. This is straight from your land use plan, what's on the screen right now.
Right.
And it is very broad
That's what I was saying.
for our suburban residential. That's your land use plan that you base your decisions off of. And it does allow limited multifamily, commercial, office, light industrial. Certain criteria have to be met. That has been our broad definition from the land use plan since its inception 10, 12 years ago. So that is what's currently on the books that we have to consider when you're looking at a consistency statement. So I'll just bring that to kind of play in with this discussion tonight.
Mr. Chairman, if I might say this, plans adopted under this chapter do not expand, diminish, or alter the scope of authority for development regulation. That's the North Carolina state law passed by the legislature. The zoning ordinance, which is passed by us, and it is a law, doesn't say about commercial and industrial. So I'm saying this is irregular, but I would like to hear what the public says.
All right.
Irregular is a good word.
As we go into the public comments, I would mention, as already been alluded to, we did, and each one of you received a copy of a letter from Ms. Linda Teal. You've had an opportunity to read that. It will be entered into the minutes of our meeting tonight, as thus. Ben, do you want to say something about it? No. Okay, good for you. So we do have a couple of folks who would like to speak toward this. I would mention too to our speakers that as you come forward, we need to hear your name and your address, and be reminded, please, that we do have a 3-minute limitation on comments. Okay? Ms. Molly Holdeman.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Molly Holdeman, and I have lived in Pitt County for over 16 years. My daughter Clara is a third grader in the amazing dual language English-Spanish program at Belvoir Elementary. I am concerned about proposed building of a Dollar General store directly across the street from my daughter's school. My concerns are traffic and public safety, litter and light pollution, and changing the nature of a rural residential zoned area of Pitt County. I understand that many of our neighbors in Belvoir and other rural and urban areas in Pitt County suffer from living in food deserts. But I would argue that Dollar General is no grocery store and would point instead to the food line that's 3.9 miles away from this proposed site. The Dollar General in Belvoir proper, which is in a commercial district, sells limited produce, milk, eggs, juice, and cheese. The Family Dollar, just 1.4 miles away from the site, sells no produce. The only fresh grocery items in stock yesterday were 2 jugs of milk and 2 jugs of orange juice. So I imagine that this proposed Dollar General will have a limited inventory like that Family Dollar. What all these stores have in common is that they sell processed foods, tobacco, beer, and wine. I am not thrilled with the idea of folks driving or walking across the street from my child's school to buy alcohol, and the notion that people could just be drinking and sitting in their cars and looking across at the children at the school day and night is pretty terrifying to me. A look around any Dollar Tree or Family Dollar General reveals litter all over the surrounding property as well as in the parking lot. A drive-by at night reveals a brightly lit storefront during all dark hours. If this rezoning request is approved, the neighbors in this area will lose their view of many stars in the night sky due to the ambient light from the store, the quiet from after school until closing time, and quite possibly wildlife that makes this area home. And there'll be trash along the roadside by the school. I understand that it is North Carolina DOT's responsibility to focus on traffic issues, but I submit that in this instance it's a great import. The summary sheet shows that the DOT is requiring entrance to this proposed project not on 33 but on Belvoir School Road. There are no sidewalks or crosswalks around Belvoir School, none along 33, none along Belvoir School Road. I hope that this board will take into account that both school and commute traffic are very busy from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. and that from approximately 2 to 2:45 every weekday, there's a line of cars that flows out of Belvoir's driveway and extends longer than a football field down the west side of the street. Of note, this summary's preliminary site plan does not depict where on Belvoir School Road the proposed driveway is in relation to the road or the school. From looking at the surveying stakes, it appears that this proposed driveway is almost directly across the street from Belvoir's main driveway and at the end of a long curve on Belvoir School Road, and that's just not safe. I have more to say, but I'll.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
I make a motion that we allow Ms. Holman to speak for 5 more minutes. That's all we have.
I
We
won't
don't
take that
have
long.
We don't have other speakers, I don't think.
I do have another speaker now.
Okay.
So-
Well, anyway, I make a motion to that effect, and I ask that you hold the board.
I have a motion that I must entertain. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion, let it be known by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Speak on.
Thank you. So the summary notes that the current zoning for this parcel is rural residential, and the future land use designation is suburban residential. These are defined in the zoning ordinance as residential uses, not commercial. The summary's general description is that this area has, quote, a mix of agricultural, industrial, institutional, and residential, end quote. But the zoning map is completely green. There's no red, there's no gray. It is rural residential and a little rural agricultural. It's not commercial, not industrial. The brown sand mine is conditionally zoned, but still is residential, agricultural, not industrial. Industrial zoned areas in Belvoir are a full mile away. And that commercial area for the future land use map is up at 264, not across the street from a school. I'm concerned that if this rezoning request is allowed, it will be the first domino in a long line that changes a rural residential and future suburban residential neighborhood to a general commercial district. And I can only imagine that the dominoes would include a vape store, bingo, sweepstake parlors, etc. In October 2021, I stood before the Pitt County Board of Commissioners, again as a Belvoir mom, to ask them to say no to crypto. People have always come to Belvoir and stayed because it is a safe, quiet, and tranquil place to live and watch the phases of the moon wax and wane, and the crops get planted, mature, and be harvested. We dodged a bullet with crypto. Let's don't take our children from a place of safety and put them in a place of danger. Let us continue to be stewards of this beautiful land and not litter it with discount retailers at every milepost. I urge you to vote no on this rezoning request. I thank you for your attention and the extra time and for your service to Pitt County.
Thank you, ma'am. Just before you leave, I just got a question too. I heard your name. What did you say your address was?
Oh, I didn't say my address. It's 776 White Horse Drive in Greenville.
Okay. So you did not receive a letter then? You don't have property adjacent to this? Okay.
No, I saw the zoning signs when I was dropping my
Okay.
daughter to.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any questions that anybody might have? I'm sorry, before she stepped away. Okay. Mr. Jason Mazzeo.
Good evening. Jason Mazzell with the Timmons Group out of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, here on behalf of Glandon Forest Equity, the applicant. Staff has provided you with a pretty detailed report of the proposed conditional rezoning. I will share with you that we knew coming into this that DOT would restrict access to NC 33. The site that's proposed was what was made available by the current landowner. The driveway location is right at the edge of the property. There's a small sliver of property in between the ditch and the Belvoir School Road right-of-way that actually belongs to the Board of Education. So that driveway is as close to that property line as we could see fit. It is directly across from the current entrance to the school, as noted. What I can share with you as far as the plan, it would meet all the county rules, all the state rules that are applicable. We would work with staff to make sure that we've met all of those conditions. Short of that, we did look hard at the comprehensive land use plan as a guide as to which zoning to utilize, and we certainly thought that conditional was appropriate here. Short of that, I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you guys have in regards to the site or anything else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question to Mr. Mazzell.
Yes, sir.
If somebody could put the picture of the development, and you could show us where the driveway is, because I don't know that everybody can picture it. So Highway 33 is at the bottom of this picture?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Highway 33 is at the bottom of the page there. I think the exhibit got cut off, so you see where Belvoir School Road note is. That road comes down, and like I said, there's a triangle sliver here that actually belongs to the Board of Education in between the right-of-way of DOT and the property line. The property line runs the center line of that ditch.
And isn't this driveway directly across from one of the driveways that
It
leads
is.
into Belvoir?
It is.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Where is the school bus route in the parking lot of the school? And where is the parent drop-off and pickup as well? Is that on Roosevelt Spain or is it on Belvoir School Road?
Roosevelt Spain.
I say Molly can probably answer that.
We actually have someone from the Board of Education here. I think
That was
we
going to
can
be my
speak to
next
that.
question. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Aaron Erickson. I'm the Interim Executive Director of Operations for Pitt County Schools. And to answer your question, the bus access right now is on Roosevelt Spain Road. However, the parent drop-off and pickup is on Belvoir School Road.
And would it be that driveway that is opposite of the proposed driveway? of this commercial?
I'm not sure I've seen the two overlaid next to each other, but if you're on the school property, the front entrance off of Belvoir School Road, the first entrance on your left is the parent drop-off and pickup. The second entrance is mostly service vehicles and teacher parking.
So that would be the same drive.
The
That
first,
big
the
building
second,
there is where it
the
is.
first driveway.
And I believe North Carolina DOT recommends that an intersection of driveways like this is best suited where they're opposite of each other. Is that correct?
Yeah, they prefer not to have jogs.
No,
They're
yeah.
gonna be jogged, they want them so far apart.
I have another question. Do you have any other Dollar Generals in Pitt County that are situated directly adjacent to a school?
Not that I'm aware of. The closest one's probably down in Chicago. I think that one's right across from a school. It's kind of a similar situation to this, where it's on the opposite side of the secondary road.
I have a question. Outside of the school discussion, there is a note in here that Pitt County Soil and Water Soil Survey shows that there may be something present, and a 50-foot riparian buffer would be required. How would that impact it as drawn?
So that is that property line ditch right there. So if the buffer is indeed present, it would shift, it would be along that stormwater pond, so we would have to reshape that.
It would just cause a reshape of the pond.
Yeah, we'd have to be offset of that buffer.
Just to make sure I'm clear, does it shift back 50 foot towards the proposed retail space?
Yes, it-
Or does it change the shape of what's designed?
The buffer would be 50 foot in that direction, and that would cause a design change at that point.
Right now, this is all standing.
Any other comments from the
I went
board?
by her twice. I mean, it's just-
Mr. Mazzell, that's it.
That's a big if.
I have another question, please. Trying to envision residential growth in this area, would it be in the best interest of a developer or even an individual to be building a home at the intersection of such a road?
I don't know if that's a question for me or a question for planning, as far as the residential application. I would think any major subdivision would have to be on an internal street. I think that's how the ordinance reads.
Yeah, James can probably speak to that better than I can as far as the ordinance, but I don't know that, the zoning ordinance would specifically.
I think I've already alluded to, I do not believe that's a perfect location for residential property. I mean, you've heard discussion about traffic, you've heard discussion about the amount of activity right there at NC 33. In my opinion, and hearing the comments tonight, it is not an appropriate place for single-family residence.
Any other comments?
Because they've got the beer and wine there too. It's a beer and wine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank y'all.
At this time, the chair will entertain a motion on the recommendation of staff to approve, a conditional approval or denial on this item.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, we deny this and that we find, if it is so necessary, that it is consistent with the land use plan, which is not consistent with the zoning ordinance, I'll add. But if we have to say that it's consistent or not consistent, we'll say that it's consistent with the language that is described in the comprehensive land use map. But I recommend denial.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a motion, Mr. McGlohorn, second by Mr. Landrine. Any comments? I would say this, and I'm just curious too, and I hear that right now what's before us is we need to make a recommendation for approval or denial, and in this particular motion, we're asking for denial. Based on, would you share with me again, Mr. McGlohorn, What are you saying as far as if, until we understand
Well, I
the
think we should
definition?
deny it.
Because I think
Because-
it's been shared with us that in the presentation, it does meet the requirements.
Well, because it is not in the interest of Pitt County to change everything rural to commercial general. In fact, it's rarely appropriate to do that. This is right beside a store that sells beer and wine. I mean, the store is right beside an elementary school, and the opportunity for people who are imbibing in beer and wine or who are interested in children is too great. And you don't put a grocery store in today's time next to a school. So also because the driveway is located on a curve, if you look at that's another reason to deny it. If you look at the map, the Belvoir School Road is like this, and I've been down there twice. I went actually 3 times. I went for myself to see it. The road is like this where the driveway is. So it's just a traffic accident waiting to happen. And there's a child who's going to get hurt there if there's going to be a general store right next to the school, right across Belvoir School Road. So my reasons are that it's inappropriate to change the nature of this area and to start the domino effect that it would cause, and that it's inappropriate to locate a Dollar General next to a store, and it's inappropriate to locate a driveway on a curve, and there is no, it doesn't matter whether we need another Dollar General or not, but just for the benefit of the board, I'll say that my opinion is that we don't. But that's not part of our decision, and that's not what we're asked to decide. But we can decide if the driveway is appropriately located and if beer and wine should be sold next to a school. We're in a position, if we don't change that now, we can't change that later because state law preempts county law. So we can't go in later and say, we want you to quit selling beer at the Dollar General. So anyway, so I think Ms. Holden, by the way, is well known for her devotion to the students and the teachers and the staff at Belvoir School. And if you know anybody who's associated with Belvoir School, they'll tell you that. So her comments were heartfelt, and I think that they bear heavy on my mind as I consider this. I'll say that.
Thank you, sir.
If I could just clarify, and I believe you addressed this, Mr. McLaughlin, but so y'all do a couple of things, make a recommendation, approval or denial, and your motion would be denial. And I believe I heard you say on the consistency part, so if we could put it back on the screen, PIO, this slide that staff has prepared,
Right.
I believe if I heard you and understood you would still adopt this statement, but
Yes, sir.
recommend denial for those reasons you.
Yes, sir.
just
It's
said.
consistent with the language of it. Yeah, yes, yes.
Okay, that, I just wanted to clarify. That was my understanding, just wanted to.
Yes,
Yep.
sir. Thank you, sir.
I got a question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown.
And listening to the reason we're denying it. Now, I live in 8. Elementary school is right here. And Speedway right there, they sell beer and wine, and they're right in front of the school. So I'm just saying, make sure we legally have a reason, because that we won't be challenged. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
If I could just speak to that, I would urge the board just to consider, so this is a conditional zoning for department variety and general merchandise. So I don't know if it'll be a Dollar General or not. Just the board needs to keep in mind it could be some other type of store that fits in that criteria. And I would just urge you to not just limit it to what the potential occupant may have it branded as or what he intends to use it for today, as far as what business is actually going to go in there. Just need to be mindful that it may be something else that fits in that warehouse. Oh, sorry. Department variety and general merchandise. So as you know, businesses change, and if y'all were to approve this, I understand that's not the motion pending, but if it were to be approved, say a Dollar General in there, it could be some other business 2 years down the road or 4 years down the road. So I just want to drive that point home, and I feel like Mr. Brown's question partly called for that, me to expand upon that.
Okay, any other comments?
Yes, I do. Each morning I pick up my granddaughter, and each evening I pick her up at Chicago. And there's a Dollar General down there, and there's very little traffic. We don't have any problems with that intersection whatsoever.
I could say that in this situation, you know, I was there, and it wasn't during the really high rush hours like 2 to 3 and early in the morning. I was there a little after 4 o'clock in that second area to the entrance to the school. That second area, I was parked there and looking at things. And first, I think I saw maybe there were several parents who came in, drove around the circle and came back out, and some of them waited there for a while. I saw 3 school buses come through there in that little bit of time I was there. And then when I came out, it took me, I don't know, I wasn't measuring it, but it took me a while to get on to 33. It took a while, and this was not at one of the high rush hours. The traffic there isn't like down in Chicago. I mean, it's heavy, and that was just during the off times. So that much I can say just from my own personal experience.
Let me just add, while I completely understand the traffic and location to the school completely, there's still one big logical if here, and that is, if this pond shifts 50 foot back, we have a completely different plan here in front of us that may not even be viable. And so I can get on board with any of the discussion of traffic, and there's a lot of what ifs in that discussion. But to not know if something exists there doesn't seem unreasonable that we shouldn't know that when the plan came before us. Just to piggyback off of, you know, we're not asking for a soil test, but to not know that a feature exists and how it will impact this plan is enough for me before we even talk about traffic and kids in school.
Yes, sir, and just to address that, so the conditional district rezoning process just requires a sketch plan, and that's what we reviewed during this. The first condition was that full-fledged site plan that goes through all the conditions of Appendix B, so that is required for any zoning permits prior to any zoning permits being issued. But just at this phase, we just require that sketch, so that's why it's not a full-fledged site plan at this point, so the ordinance just doesn't require, just to address that.
Yeah, I understand that's the same problem we're dealing with, but it's not an unreasonable extra piece of information that I would have expected to be here, as big of impact as it looks like it could have.
Any other comments? And I would say that as we move forward on this particular item that we have before us, we must be reminded also that coming to this board, yes, we are moving forward, but realizing that there are things that are going to be required to happen before anything comes to reality. And yeah, I'm familiar with this area, with Belvoir, and again, I guess either way I let my vote go, I'm gonna be criticized, okay, and I'm okay with that, because in the meantime, I've heard some things said about whether it's a Dollar General or if it was Steve's retail location, and it were me, I'd come be asking the same consideration, that at least you give me the shot to move the next step, realizing what the conditions are, and that's where we fall back to. We're talking about a conditional approval or denial. The motion is on the floor, and unless there are other comments, that's what we'll move forward on the vote on. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by raising of the right hand.
Motion to deny.
I'm sorry?
The motion to deny.
A motion to deny, I'm sorry, motion to deny. A motion to deny. Let me know, Miss, the raising of the right hand. All against denying by the raising of the right hand. Madam Clerk, what is the count?
I think it was 5 and 5. Who denied it? Thompson? 2, 3.
No, we didn't
What?
Miss Naomi, do you?
Denied the motion?
Denied, yeah, what,
Do you deny it?
I denied the motion, yes.
No, I did not.
Okay, what
No,
did you?
no.
you gotta reword it.
All in, let me do this again. All in favor of the motion, which is for a vote for denial of this item, let it be known by raising the right hand. You're voting for your motion.
To deny.
I see 4, right?
To deny it 4.
Yep. All right. To vote against denying, raise your right hand. Now what do you see?
6.
6 to 3 voting,
6 to 4
6 to 4
to not deny it.
to not deny. So now, Mr. Jordan, you want to share with me the motion that I'm looking?
I was just going to recommend, I would recommend, well, I'm not recommending it. I would say the board needs to take further action.
Okay.
And that just that the vote that just happened, if you were in the negative on that, doesn't mean, does that make sense to the board members? I see you, the chairman shaking his head.
Yeah, I'm
You said you
going
have
with
to have
you.
a motion to approve.
At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve this item on conditional approval.
I make the motion. I think that staff did within their guidelines exactly what they were supposed to do. And that preliminary says that it's approved under our guidelines. So I'll make a motion we approve.
I have a motion that we approve conditional approval on this item. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Brown. Motion by Mr. Hardy. Any more comments before we vote? All in favor of the vote to approve, conditional approval for this item, let it be known by the raising of the right hand. All opposed, like sign. The motion to approve is 6 to 4. Can I do that? All right. Yeah. All right. Moving along. Mr. Goby, let's talk about Envision Pitt County 2045.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so let's talk about Envision Pitt County 2045. Tonight, we are asking you to hold a public hearing to consider recommendation to pass on to the Board of County Commissioners. That public hearing will be on March 20th. We have advertised this hearing. I don't know that anybody has signed up to speak, but hopefully you have had a chance to go on the project website, look at the plan. If not, there's a copy. This is not the entire plan. This does not include the appendix, which is primarily the background information, demographic information. So, but what you have in front of you has the goals and objectives, the future land use map, the proposed character areas. So this is really sort of the meat and potatoes of the plan itself. So like I said, hopefully you've had a chance to go on the website since it's been posted and had a chance to look at it before tonight. But we have Jake Petrosky with Stewart here tonight, and he will be kind of walking you through some of these things. This is essentially your 4th steering committee meeting also. So he'll be walking through and giving a brief presentation before we get to the actual public hearing. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn over to Jake if that's okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Eric. Good evening.
Good evening, Jake.
Thanks for having me. I want to talk a little bit about the project, just to give you an overview, talk about the draft plan, some major components in there, some of the recommendations, and some key topics. I think that was a kind of a good primer to talk about why the land use plan is important. And I can, while I go through this, I'll probably point out a couple things that we included in the plan to address and provide some additional guidance for some of these legislative decisions that you all have before you, like rezonings. So I'll talk about that kind of as we go, and then we'll have a next steps and discussion and move on to the public hearing. So first of all, comprehensive plan, it is long range. We are thinking 10 or 20 years out. So what is likely to happen in 10 or 20 years? How do we manage growth, encourage strategic growth and utilization of infrastructure, and also reduce conflict? I mean, that's one of the things that we're trying to do. It provides guidance in terms of land uses, intensity, design, particularly as it relates to design and location of growth and development. Some of those things are definitely, I think, improved from the existing land use plan. It will provide staff guidance on how to spend their time, but also programs and infrastructure investment and individual land use decisions. It's collaborative. It's really meant to document a community conversation that we've had over the last 14 months or so. It's policy. It's not regulatory. So this is a policy document, but it can reinforce current regulations or offer groundwork for changes in regulations moving forward. Comprehensive plan is mainly about land use and development, but it's also about other things that are really important: natural resources, parks and recreation, land use and housing, infrastructure and services, economic development. All these things the plan touches on in some form or fashion. The schedule, really, it was a 3-phase process, and we're kind of at the end. We have a draft plan. We're working with staff and talking about implementation and those sorts of things. And this is the steering committee that is meant to be the final steering committee potentially, and then move forward for adoption. Engagement activities, as I mentioned, this is really meant to be a community conversation. We did have a lot of interaction with stakeholders in the public. So we had stakeholder meetings, these steering committee meetings. We had a survey with over 300 responses, 5 public meetings as well, and there will be 2 public hearings. In the draft plan, just to kind of acquaint you with it a little bit and provide a brief overview for those in the audience that may not be familiar with it yet. It has an introduction that really talks about the project in general, the process, engagement, why we're doing a land use plan in general, and it is required by state law if you enforce zoning, so that's really why we're doing it. But also it's just a good idea to plan, especially in a county that's growing like you are. The input and goals, so what did we hear from folks, and what are some of the priorities, and then recommendations. And the recommendations are really the meat of the plan, future land use map, and different recommendations by different topic areas. And then the appendix, a little bit on previous plans and mapping and public engagement results and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the brief overview of the plan document. The input and goals section. Here's where we talk about what we heard from the community. So the community survey was really a critical part of this. Who we heard from, but also their priorities. For instance, community priorities for the plan. On the right hand of the slide, protection of farms and open space, managed growth, utility and infrastructure improvements, really important. Development preferences, people like agriculture, want to encourage agriculture, but they also want more retail and restaurants. They want tourism opportunities, that sort of thing. Individual, preferences on residential, parks and recreation, all those things are in here. Public meetings. This spread really looks at things we heard from the public, how they really prefer residential development to be designed, other development priorities, and parks and rec preferences. Planning topic areas, I mentioned these. We're not just talking about land use and development, but that's a key part of this, but also talking about cultural assets, historical preservation and agriculture, housing, economic development, transportation, natural environment, and parks and community health. So all these things contribute to the success of Pitt County 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and we touch on them in the plan. The future land use map is a really important part of this plan. You all are going to use it probably every meeting. It's meant to provide land use guidance. It identifies the intended development pattern, so where more agricultural areas are, residential, commercial, mixed-use areas, and intended general design and scale and density. It is policy, it's not regulatory, but it can influence regulatory changes. It should influence development design, guide rezoning decisions, and guide infrastructure and service investment decisions, because you all cannot provide infrastructure in the same level of county services everywhere. If you try to, it would be a financial disaster, right? You can't provide the same level of service everywhere. So you can see on this map, just by looking at it, there's a lot of green on it, right? There is a lot of areas that are labeled as conservation open space, of course, the floodplains and that sort of thing, but also agricultural and rural residential. Those are areas where, based on where services are and infrastructure, we really don't want to encourage really dense development, really intense development. So that's why, there's a lot of green on this map. The suburban residential area is still on this map. It has been tightened up a lot from your previous land use plan that really looks at areas that are meant to be suburban in character, where you have neighborhoods and some commercial and non-residential uses. And then we have these rural centers, commercial crossroads that are established communities, historic commercial areas, those sort of things that we want to provide some flexibility in. Your commercial mixed-use areas, which are more heavy commercial, only some of those, employment and industrial areas. Now, I do want to spend, a bit of time talking about the suburban residential area, because, we are keeping that. And if you look at the revised description, we did revise that description to provide a little bit more detail as to what we want to see there in the process that we want to see happen there. Couple things that we did in the revised description here. We did say that's primarily single-family homes with neighborhoods with interconnected streets. We did talk about non-residential uses in that character area. They should be located with frontage and access to a major highway or secondary road at major intersections or proximity to similar uses with spatial separation or buffers between incompatible uses. And then non-residential development should be designed in a context-sensitive manner and may be considered on a case-by-case basis in a conditional zoning district. So, we are basically saying that it's mostly single-family residential in that area, but it does allow for some potential non-residential uses and sets up a legislative decision for this body and the Board of Commissioners to make. It's your legislative decision whether it's appropriate based on the site, based on the context, based on the traffic, based on a number of factors that play into that decision. Also, the conditional zoning process allows you to work with the applicant and establish conditions for that development that can reduce impacts to existing uses. So that's kind of the framework for that suburban, residential area, and it's a flexible framework. It really relies on this decision-making body and the Board of Commissioners to decide whether it's appropriate or not, just like that you all did. That's the framework that we set up, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of site design, and I can answer more questions about that if you all have it. So land use recommendations, the main recommendation is utilize the comprehensive land use plan and future land use map when considering land use decisions, which you all are doing. Improve the subdivision permitting and approval process and define residential growth areas and protect prime agricultural lands. Also maintain Pitt County's rural character is part of those recommendations. Quality development. We talk about what makes quality development in this plan and some recommendations about it. Transportation infrastructure standards. We heard that loud and clear from the survey and our public meetings, as people want to make sure that the roads are adequate and they're connected and that sort of thing, well maintained. Transitional features. This is one of the ways that we reduce impact on existing uses. And whether that's a commercial use coming in next to a subdivision, requiring adequate buffers and spatial separation, or even residential into agricultural areas. If you have working agricultural lands, it's ideal to include a planted buffer between that new residential use and the agricultural agricultural operation. Because there is some dust, there is noise, and we don't want to impact that farmer's ability to work that land just by putting a new subdivision there. And there is some policy guidance on how to reduce impacts, where high-impact uses should be located, and how to reduce impacts on really looking at existing residential development. So that's based on this concern over commercial development and light industrial uses in residential and rural areas that we've kind of heard through the process. Parks and community health, updating the Parks Master Plan, talking about where future joint use agreements and new facilities will be needed or are needed now based on underserved areas. Talking about increased funding, enhancing Alice Keene District Park, and improving park access north of the Tar River and in growing areas. Transportation, connections are really important. The plan identifies improvement priorities for intersections. It also references the comprehensive transportation plan that shows where new roadways will be needed. It also talks about collector streets, the idea that as we grow and develop, we should not be putting all our traffic on these two-lane, narrow farm-to-market roads. Sometimes we need some additional connections to disperse traffic. And there's not going to be a lot of money available from the state to build new location thoroughfares in the county. A lot of that's going to have to come from new development. So the plan identifies some areas where if development occurs, there needs to be connections. It doesn't specify exactly where it has to go, but it's basically saying we need to break up this big super block in order to disperse traffic so that we're not relying on a two-lane road to handle all the new traffic, especially in the southeast area. That's a critical part of that area. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but connectivity is important to reduce travel times, ensure emergency access, just a lot of reasons for that. It talks specifically, some of the recommendations talk about school sites and design and development near there, greenways and bus service on the transportation side of things. Natural resources, protecting water quality and managing stormwater is a big part of that. Maintaining and improved drainage, protecting natural resources, and improving Tar River recreation access. Tar River is a great asset. It's an underutilized asset right now. Also talks about addressing litter, which the county is already embarking on a major initiative there, but that is also included in here. So that's kind of a brief overview. Happy to go and talk more about the land use plan itself, the future land use map. The draft plan is available for review and comment on envisionpittcounty2045.com. We have a public hearing tonight and then a public hearing at the Board of Commissioners meeting on the 20th. But I think that is all I got in terms of the overview, and we can certainly have a discussion.
Good deal. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate your presentation. And as we look at this, I kind of like what's on the very first page in the introduction when he talks about the fact that Envision Pitt County 2045 is a comprehensive land use plan that addresses housing, infrastructure and services, natural resources, land use, cultural resources, parks and community health, and economic development. And in saying all that, I'm a little maybe disappointed tonight, maybe that we didn't have a crowd to come in and at least make comments on the work that's being done by the staff and by yourself and by others to make us aware of what we're really looking to do these next 20, 25 years, okay? So thank you for this presentation. I'll entertain and just see if there's any comments from the board members.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, Jake.
Yes, sir, Mr. Torres.
The community response to your previous stakeholder meetings and all of the public events that we had held, and also including your online, how is that typical, how does that fare with other communities that have gone through this process?
Great question.
I mean, I'd say it's pretty typical. It's, I'd love it if, there was 100 people here wanting to talk about the plan. It's hard to get folks to think long-term and to talk about things in the future. But the response that we did get, we did have a lot of folks show up at a few of the meetings, and then the folks that did come, some of the meetings that were less attended, were very vocal. And we did hear a lot about their priorities. Some of those priorities we can address as a county. Some of them, we had to point them in the right direction, right? But we did hear a lot about their priorities, and that goes, in different areas of the county as well. Even the latest meetings that we had north of the river were pretty well attended, and it turned into a very productive discussion, I think, about specific priorities. And some people were saying, well, about talking about road maintenance, but they actually live in the city of Greenville. So, I mean, there's nothing we can do about that, but we can address these other concerns and needs that they were bringing up, especially in the county's jurisdiction and that sort of thing. So, I think that, overall, I think it was a good response, and it had a lot of good conversation, a lot of good input. But there's more work needed too. I mean, that's the other thing that I think the plan points out in the community health section, is that, this engagement is not a one-time thing. It's not like, we go out and we meet with the public and we have this plan and we don't talk to them again for 10 years until the next plan update. The community engagement is really meant to be an ongoing process. And I think that, some of the connections that were made and some folks that got involved are probably, want to be involved more. That's something that we heard as well. Like they want to be involved and have an opportunity to weigh in on things, more often probably than just every couple years when we do this plan update.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Jake. Appreciate your hard work.
See if I can't pull our screen back up real quick. Give it 1 second. Okay, so as Jake mentioned, at this point we would like to open the public hearing. We don't have anybody signed up. I don't think we have anybody here, but we would like to officially open it. And at that point, after the hearing, we will ask the board for recommendation to forward on to the Board of County Commissioners. Jake mentioned that hearing is scheduled for March 20th. So we will, at this point, like to open up the public hearing.
At this time, we will open our meeting up for a public hearing to discuss or to have any comments about Envision Pitt County 2045. Having none that have signed up, and I see none that are coming forward, I'll close this public hearing, okay? And at this time, the chair would entertain a motion for a recommendation to recommend adoption of the proposed Envision Pitt County 2045 Comprehensive Land Use Plan.
I'd like to make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hemby makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Here's a second by Mr. Hardy. Are there any comments or conversation concerning this motion?
I've got one comment, question. And you might have to correct me on how this works, or even if I might be out of order. Is there a way for us, as Mr. McLaughlin was saying, to, in some of the things in this plan, better define what some of these zones? I mean, it's, for instance, I even look here in what we describe as rural residential and what we describe as suburban residential. Okay, and so that doesn't mix up with the wording at all as far as, and what we're talking about. And then we describe commercial, and it just happens to be almost the exact thing we were talking about. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't somehow get our wording a little bit more clearer instead of being what some people would consider misleading.
Well,
in
I think
some
you're
ways.
bringing up a good point, just the naming of zoning districts versus the naming of the future land use districts. And because there's some of that are the same name, but they're, you know, the land use plan is a little bit bigger picture. You know, one of the things that could be is instead of calling it suburban residential, you could call it suburban, right? That's one option. Instead of calling it rural residential, you could call it, you know, rural area, rural, or rural living, or something like that, you know, to distinguish between the two, that's one option. And then, you know, as far as the suburban residential goes, I think I laid out why we are including some of the potential for some non-residential uses and talking about locational criteria and that sort of thing, and really leaving it up to this board and the Board of Commissioners from a legislative standpoint to either agree with the rezoning or not. And the conditional use process or conditional zoning process is the vehicle for that. But as you know, we're talking about options here. I mean, you could say, well, we really want to call that, you know, suburban residential still, and rename the zoning district to something, you know, or something like that, and not allow for commercial development in our suburban, you know, residential area, the future land use. That's an option. But as I said, like that's the reason why we did that was to leave that framework open and rely on this decision making body for those kind of legislative decisions. But yeah, any of that's open in terms of renaming and revising. Yeah.
Good question, Mr. Latrine, and just to reach a point of clarity for us as we all go forward. So, great discussion. So, any other comments or?
And one of the things that I'll just point out is you can vote to approve it, or you can vote to approve it with some changes. You know what I mean? So if you really didn't want to leave that suburban residential as suburban residential, you could, you know, approve it with that change. Just call it suburban, something like that.
Just now that the situation's come up, I would imagine that there are others that I would think have just a little too much wiggle room. I know that, yes, we want to leave it up to the board in certain areas, but, you know, I think we might leave some things a little too vague, you know, in many cases.
I think that there's not as much problem with the definition of suburban residential in my mind as it is the total failure to consider context-sensitive development.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think this board totally fails to understand context-sensitive development. But I have no problem with a store being in a suburb, but I do have a problem not thinking about context sensitivity. I'll just say that.
Yeah. What he said.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think that we do, one of the recommendations in the plan is to revisit your zoning code. Your zoning code's not meant to be etched in stone, right? So, you know, and I think that if you read through the plan, there are some recommendations as to, you know, review your, you know, commercial zoning process and districts and that sort of thing. And it could be that, you know, the general commercial district is not the best vehicle to accommodate rural commercial, right? You could have, you know, potentially some other new district or overlay that better is more appropriate and has some design requirements that are more appropriate for rural areas. That's, you know, that's a potential.
Does any other planning authority consider context sensitivity in other words, as a condition, just like we declare that something is consistent with our plan, which I don't disagree. I think that's, I mean, I support the comprehensive land use plan. So I want that to be clear, but I think that we don't always consider what something is going to look like when you put it in a general commercial use, you know, right in the middle of land that has been farmed for generations. Maybe that's what we want to do in Pitt County, but it's not what I want to do.
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, and I mean, one of the you know, potential suggestions is if that's something that you really want me and staff to look at, and include as kind of an amendment or an addition, when we bring it to the board, we can do that. And make sure that we are addressing context-sensitive rural commercial design. And I think that, we could probably add a recommendation or two, or make sure that there's a recommendation or two that addresses that. And we can get with staff and talk about the current zoning framework and include, maybe some ways that we can improve that. And give you all some tools or some ideas on how to utilize this conditional zoning process to get to more context-sensitive design. I think it's the vehicle. I think that we might just need a little bit more guidance in here to kind of give you all some more guidance on it.
Well, if we made a separate finding, at least we would have been asked to consider it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not even part of the picture, not in our decision making.
Right. I would, and not exactly sure how, Mr. Chairman, but I would recommend that. I would recommend that, staff relook at this and help narrow or broaden the inclusion of context in different situations, so that it makes it a little more. I'm looking at us going down the same route as Greenville in the Horizon Zone, in the Horizons plan. It seems like every time you turn around, they just almost overlook it for some technical reason, and it seems like we're starting to do the same thing. So, I'd say, in my opinion, I'd like staff to look at that a little closer, make any type of adoptions you think might make sense to help this. I mean, I'm for the plan too. We all, I think, want the same thing, but I think when we set a plan, it needs to be a plan that we try to keep to, that we try to maintain.
Yeah, I think you recommend with the addition of some more language related to context-sensitive commercial design in rural areas. And I think it could result in a policy in the plan, but it also could result in a next step. That after the plan's adoption, there's some adjustment to the zoning code or some kind of guidance that gives you a little bit more to go off of in these rezonings that come before you, that may be appropriate if the design is right.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would like to withdraw my motion because based on what I'm hearing, it needs to be additional work. My motion was to move it forward as is. I'm hearing board members having some concerns, so I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Emby.
I just want to add on that, how we address context sensitive. If we too heavily define context sensitive, it's no longer going to be context sensitive. Right.
Consider it.
And so, I would just say if the staff's going to go back and present something else, that I believe, maybe I finally understand that, I have no doubt, I support the land use plan too, and I have no doubt that the staff does a great job and they bring us recommendations. But that our role should be the context sensitive piece and not the staff, because they don't need that risk, or that gray area, and hence the purpose of the planning board to do that. And so, just my caution that if context sensitive is addressed too much, it's no longer context sensitive.
Right. I get it. But it's this is really related to LU6, which is the recommendation on page 35 that is maintain Pitt County's rural character. So and this is going to come before you all a lot in that there's going to be applicants for rezoning to commercial uses in rural areas, and it might be appropriate, but there might be some things they could do to make it a little bit more appropriate. So that's where it fits there, and also probably related to economic development as well. Because, I mean, commercial uses are good for the county if they're well done, and because they can provide tax base, they can, you know, provide options for folks, but at the same time, like, you don't want it to be at the expense of that rural character.
I hear the word context. What'd you say? Sensitive, right? Is that anything like saying, be careful what you ask for, you may get it? I mean.
No, I think maybe we should just
so
use that word
again,
more often.
I think we're all in favor of the Envision 2045 plan. We probably still don't understand it enough yet, okay, as far as some of the definitions of some of what we've even heard tonight.
Well, I think those categories, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think what we've heard from the far end tonight is exactly right. We have gotten a lot of good input. The context sensitivity, we had that debate openly tonight with the rezoning request. We can provide additional guidance, but I still think at the end of the day, what you heard earlier, the board needs to have that decision. Staff is going to bring forward, based on our best professional knowledge of the land use plan and other information, our recommendation. Each one of you gets to decide, is it an appropriate location to put general commercial next to a school? You need to have that debate, that open debate. I think that's a good, lively debate we had tonight. But for us to sit here, can we provide additional guidance? Yes. But for us to try to maneuver things so finely, that removes any flexibility, any discussion you can have as far as what might be appropriate at this location that looks a little bit similar to over here, but not quite the same. That's your decision. That's why you signed up for our planning board. So I just want to say, I think it has worked well, even tonight. Not everyone agreed, because not everyone agreed with where something was being placed to another type of use. But that's what we like to see among this board. I just lay that out for your consideration.
And I agree. I don't think any of us wants to see some radical change to what we have. But I think as Mr. Stewart said it perfectly, I think it needs a little bit more work. That's all. I'm not talking about crazy work or making it so rigid to where there's no room for debate. But I think it could be a little more work, a little more clearly defined in some areas.
May I comment, please?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. It is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong or misunderstanding, but a comprehensive plan, a land use plan, is a suggested use and not a solid use, whereas our zoning laws are more solid. And we have the opportunity to make those judgments as needed, as was discussed earlier tonight. So I don't see the land use plan as being the end-all. And we use that contextual sensitivity in our thoughts when we come to the zoning process. Is that, am I correct in that?
That's right, that's right. So what we're talking about here is we would not nail down, this is context-sensitive design. What we would say is, you know, in order to maintain rural character, you know, through the conditional rezoning process, consider context-sensitive design changes to site plans. You know, they could include, and we can maybe even do a call-out box or something that shows what other communities that are trying to do the same thing are doing. Some of the things that are conditions in conditional rezonings for commercial districts, it varies widely right across, you know, based on if you're a town, if you're a county, or whatever. But it could include, you know, certain site design features, right? It could include, well, access location, frontage treatments, you know, buffers, parking lot location, building location, building size, building materials, building, you know, all these different things could be part of that discussion. And yes, it's going to depend on area. I mean, what's context sensitive in one area might be totally different than another area based on adjacent development, right? So those are the kinds of things, you know, we could add into here. It's probably a recommendation and some clarifications. But again, yeah, we cannot nail down what is context-sensitive design in every location in Pitt County in this plan. It's meant to be way more general, but also more flexible than that.
So help me as I look at this envision plan again and looking back at pages 34 and 35 when we talk about land use and development. We're really telling ourselves and telling everybody through this plan that we will continue to update zoning ordinances. We'll continue to study each case as it comes up to be, am I saying it right, to have flexibility and to let it be left to the board to make recommendations going forward? I mean, are we chasing something that's already here?
I mean, I think it's in there, but I would, you know, if
Can you enhance it?
yeah, we can enhance. We can work with staff and add just one more recommendation about context-sensitive commercial design and give you a little bit more direction. I think is what I hear is kind of the what you all want to see in it, and that's just something that, you know, we can include and take to the board and explain to them that one addition. And I think it's good because they're going to see the reason why, because we can point to this discussion.
Can we have that by our next meeting?
I'd say, I'd like to make a motion, since the last motion was withdrawn, correct?
Correct.
I'd like to make a motion that we have staff further enhance our zoning rules so that that it includes more context-sensitive inclusion. Does that make sense?
I think
How would you
what
word
we recommend is to adopt the plan to the board
Right.
with the addition of addressing context-sensitive commercial design. That's good enough. And that will, you know, take it to the board, and that can be an action item that later, after this plan is adopted, you know, there's some ways that, you know, staff can address that over time. I think that's what I would recommend.
Okay, that is what I recommend.
So if John, if I might say, you would agree that your motion could be, if they would just include that as a criterion to be considered when designing rural areas. Is that right?
Right.
Or context sensitive. Well, I don't know that there's any heart for using it anywhere else, or even there. But my heart is that we have context sensitive design, but I don't know what the board's heart is. But that's the way I understand your message, that they massage it in order to put that in there. Is that right?
I heard a motion, and
I didn't hear a
Ted,
second.
can you
I didn't hear a second on
read
that
what
motion, Mr. Chairman.
was said, or not?
I didn't write it down.
Okay, all right. Let's state the motion, please.
So recommend approval of the plan with the addition of a recommendation to address context-sensitive commercial design, context-sensitive rural commercial design.
I second it.
You good with the motion?
Yes, good, the motion is set.
Good.
I think that would be to forward it to the board, and we would just include that recommendation.
That's right, we're not holding it up
Yeah.
going to the board.
Right.
That's what we wanted to be clear about, if we
Right.
needed to push our commissioners'
Yes.
hearing back in
Yeah.
April, or if we
Right,
just
right,
proceed
Yeah,
on.
no,
Okay.
No, let's
Yeah,
don't
right,
hold it up.
right, no, right.
He just wanted to
Exactly.
massage you a little bit.
Mr. Lindblom made the motion, Mr. Hardy seconded. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by raising of the right hand. All opposed, like sign.
Thank you, sir, appreciate it.
Okay.
And just real quick, I just want to thank Jake and his staff also for all the work that he's done. He's spent the last year or so with us, and put up with a lot of comments and back and forth and reviews from us, so I just want to publicly thank him and his staff for that. Thank you.
Jake, sounds like you were in good company the whole time, though. Thank you, sir.
And I'll second that, plus I'll acknowledge Eric and his hard work, because you've just seen a portion of what's been edited more than a couple of times, and there's still about twice as many pages somewhere else that Eric's been working diligently on, so he's done an outstanding job in bringing that forward. Real quickly, two things that I'd like to acknowledge. Thank you to our subcommittee that's working for our subdivision ordinance review. Had our first kickoff meeting tonight. I understand from staff it went really well. Probably a couple more meetings or so before we bring recommendations back to the full board. So again, appreciate you doing some side work, you members that are dealing on that particular subcommittee. The other thing that I'll just highlight as far as your informational items, our recreation plan for our office park north of the river. Remember, we've got a community center / gymnasium that's being proposed there with some outdoor recreation being proposed. We really hadn't thought about putting that type of use on that property out there, so it's just adjacent to the agricultural center. We currently have a survey going on. It'll run through the end of the month. You can, it's a flyer in your, if I can get over here to it, pull it up. You can go right on our website, click on this survey, North of the River Community Center rec plan, and give us all the input you'd like for that particular site. It's going to be a nice addition north of the river and to our office park. So those are two main things. There's some other informational items in your package as well as your monthly report. And Mr. Chairman, that's all we have for tonight. And again, thank you for serving on as a steering committee for our land use plan. Great land use plan, a lot of good work, and you'll have a fresh new look when you look at rezonings from the future on once it's adopted. Thank you.
James, thank you, and thank the staff for all the work that they do for us. Before we adjourn, any comments from any board member?
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. McGowan for his energy tonight.
His energy, okay.
Yeah, I was able to sit back and enjoy him.
All right. The chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
We are adjourned.